Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zarin Tasnim and I'll be hosting today's session. I'm pursuing my PhD in mechanical engineering here at University of Oklahoma with Dr. Pejman Kazanpour and Dr. Iman Kamarian. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the graduate student community to the Spring 2026 seminar series. So before we begin the talk, I will take a moment to briefly introduce the GSC and the activities we do. The GSC leadership team for the academic year 2025-26 is shown here. We have currently Rodney and Samuel as our co-chair. Swapnil, Avinash, and Ahmad handle the publicity. We have Siavash and Anshu as our co-treasurers, and we have a wonderful supporting team including Roshan, Rachel, Suramya, Biba, Nuran, and me. Uh, we are also fortunate to have Professor Farooq Mistry as our faculty mentor. The JC team has regular meetings every week. This semester, we usually meet at Wednesdays at 6 p.m. These meetings are held on Zoom and sometimes they are hybrid as well. So if you're willing to join GSC or have any questions regarding the meetings, feel free to contact Rodney. I would like to mention that the current meeting time we have is set based on the schedule of the attending students. So if you would like to join but are not available at this time, please feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to accommodate you and adjust accordingly. So to become a member of GSC, uh, which I encourage you all to do, please scan the QR code or use the link. This helps us share the updated information about our seminars, events, and other activities. We have an active LinkedIn page where we post all the updates and upcoming events. So feel free to follow these on our social media. We also have the Facebook and Instagram pages. So if you are active on social media, you can connect with us there to stay updated. And also, in case you miss any session, the recordings are uploaded to YouTube, and we encourage you to subscribe so you can watch the videos at any time. We also have a dedicated space for all the GSC member, which is the Dave and Susan Bird team room. This is a wonderful space available to all the GSC members, and that includes several useful amenities. So if you need access, please feel free to contact Rodney. A very important note, I request you all to fill out the Google attendance form that will be shared in the chat shortly. This helps us maintain records, stay connected, and secure continued funding for our events. You will be receiving the link shortly. So this seminar, our theme is exploring research frontiers with generative AI, focusing on methods, implications, and emerging research directions. So AI is rapidly changing research workflows, and our goal is to bring speakers who can demonstrate not only the technology, but also the thinking and the responsibility behind it. This is something we aim to explore through the JSC seminar series this semester. The JSC team has put effort into bringing together leading voices from academia and industry. We aim to feature speakers who can address one or more of the following themes: how people can work with generative AI to create intellectual, economic, and social value and connect these domains; research issues, methods, and applications that arise when collaborating across academia, industry, and community. Ways to design generative AI initiatives that link academic inquiry, economic innovation, and social benefit in ethical and equitable ways. If you know someone or if you are working on this area, please contact Farooq or Rodney or anyone from the GSC team. We would be very happy to include you in the seminar series. So these are our forthcoming seminars, a little bit of them. In April 8, we have Parinas who will be talking about a ML framework for early lung cancer screening. In April 22nd, we have Shishi Shah, who is the Chief AI Officer in the Gallagly Chair, and also a Gallagly Chair President and Director from the School of Computer Science. We'll be talking about Behind Real Data, Generative AI in Cloth Changing REID. In April 29th, we have Andrew, who is a postdoctoral researcher and will be talking about AI for fault detection and diagnosis. So now I know you all are willing for today's talk. I'm delightful to introduce Suramyaa Sarkar. Suramyaa Sarkar is a second-year Ph.D. student in School of Realization Laboratory at the University of Oklahoma, where she works under Professor Farooq Mistry and Professor Janet Allen. She earned her bachelor degree in Electronics and Instrumentation Engineering from the Heritage Institute of Technology in Kolkata. Before beginning her PhD, she completed research internships at IIT, where she worked on data leakage through Trojans, and in the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, where she worked on nonlinear and convex optimization. Her current research focuses on context-aware control systems with interest in control architectures, feedback loops, and the quantification of system architectures. In the long term, she hopes to contribute to both research and teaching with the goal of becoming a professor. Today's talk will introduce the core idea behind generative AI and demonstrate how these ideas are being applied in her research. With that, please join me in welcoming Suramyaa Sarkar. Thank you. Suramya, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Zareen, for introducing me. I will share my screen. Is my screen sharing?
Yeah, we see it.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Suramyaa Sarkar, and today I will present a part of my research on how I translate systems archetypes into quantitative decision formulations. In this work, I use a photovoltaic battery microgrid as a test problem, but my larger goal in this research is to understand how recurring structural patterns can support more intelligent control and decision design. Just take out the pointer. Okay. So I will about a brief overview of my research. While researchers widely use archetypes to interpret system behavior, most studies rely primarily on qualitative explanations. Now, they use causal loop diagrams to visualize these feedback structures, yet they rarely extend these representations into quantitative decision formulations that support systematic policy evaluation. Researchers need a quantitative satisfying representation if they want to incorporate archetypal structures directly into decision design. Before I begin, I will clarify what I mean by some key terms in the title, because these terms are often used in different ways. And so, uh, often used in different ways. By context aware, I refer to a system that responds to changing physical resource and stakeholder conditions. System archetypes are recurring feedback structures that explain common system behavior, and they have been mentioned in the book Fifth Discipline and have been defined by Peter Senge. And then I come to the method. The method is basically, I'm saying that we first identify the system variables and feedback relationships using the causal loop diagrams. We then interpret these feedback structures through the archetype. Finally, we translate the identified structural tension into a compromise decision support formulation in which competing goals, constraints, and deviational variables represent the trade-offs. I will talk about CDSP in my next slide, which is the compromise decision support problem. To make this method understandable to people, we illustrate it through a procedure, through an energy allocation problem in a photovoltaic battery microgrid serving critical services, households, and productive users in rural community. Okay. So to understand this, let's see what the frame of reference is. So there are this recurring behavioral pattern in complex systems. We introduce this system archetypes as recurring behavioral patterns. Now we define them as feedback structures. Now they can be formed by a reinforcing and balancing loops. Now these loops are basically the interactions, and they explain why the system exhibits similar behaviors across different domains. We considered the common archetypes mentioned in the book by Peter Senge, Fifth Discipline, which are fixes that fail, limits to growth, tragedy of commons. For understanding, let me explain what fixes that fail means. Fixes that fail archetype is basically a pattern that describes where the system, where there's a quick fix solution, temporarily resolves a problem symptom. But indeed, it creates an unintended delayed consequence that worsens the original problem. So there are other archetypes and patterns, and we can define our problems through them. The problem that I'm going to explain in the later slides fall under this category of fixes that fail that we will see. And therefore, I just defined this one for now. And why qualitative archetype interpretation is not enough? Let's understand what is qualitative archetype interpretation. So these words that you see, like fixes that fail or success to the successful or any kind of pattern, are mostly words, right? We don't have any mathematics to back them up. And in this slide, we identify that the main gap that motivates our work is this, that there are qualitative archetype interpretation and they are not enough. It is valuable. Qualitative archetype interpretation is valuable because it helps us identify the feedback loops, delayed effects, and recurring structural tensions, like you can see. So you can see that there is this causal loop diagram of fixes that fail archetype, and it has a short-term fix, but then it gives us a reinforcing loop. The R is the reinforcing and B is the balancing, as mentioned in the previous slide. And that leads to a long-term unintended consequences. So interpretation alone doesn't tell us what decision to make. It does not allow us to compare the policies, represent the trade-off explicitly, or evaluate operational decisions under constraints. The gap is not that qualitative interpretation lacks value. The gap is that we still need a way to translate this qualitative archetype interpretation into something more structural and computable decision framework. The transition is basically the focus of the work, and decision makers need that. In this slide, we explain why we need a satisficing decision model. Now, what do we mean by satisficing? Why satisficing? And how do we do it? In the upcoming problem that you will see, we see that the next slide, the operator must manage the two competing objectives. Now, these objectives conflict each other. Because of this tension, we do not assume that all goals are satisfied at once. Instead, we use a satisficing formulation to represent the compromise explicitly. Satisficing is a decision-making strategy that aims for a good enough or satisfactory solution rather than something which is optimal or perfect. Why satisficing? Because not all goals can be fully satisfied at the same time. And because of this tension, we do not assume that. More broadly, we develop a structured method that begins with a causal loop representation of the problem, moves through the archetype representation or the interpretation. So you first design the causal loop through the cycles that I showed in the previous slide, this one. And then you understand, okay, this causal loop it falls under a specific pattern or a specific archetype. And once you get that archetype, you translate it into something which is more understandable and mathematical and computable. Um, so we use the CTSP because it allows us to represent the system goals, measure deviations from those goals, and evaluate the compromise among competing objectives. So CTSP is the compromise decision support problem. So we have the research contribution, which is the new knowledge of this. And this is the proposed approach here, which I already said. Like, we construct the causal loop, we interpret it through a system archetype, we translate the structure into a compromise decision support formulation, and we evaluate the alternative microgrid policies, because we are talking about microgrid here. And so that falls under our test problem. So the test problem here is that I use a photovoltaic battery microgrid as a test problem. That supplies electricity to 3 stakeholder groups in a rural community, which is critical service, household, and productive activities. This system includes a solar generation, a battery storage, and then the 3 stakeholders, as I said. And the operational challenge is that solar generation varies daily. And while demand remains higher than available supply in many periods, so the operator uses the battery to reduce this service shortfalls that they see. But the problem is that whenever they're using this corrective action, it is creating a long-term damage or longer-term problem, because repeated battery discharge degrades the battery and reduces the future system capability. And that is our problem here. Now I'll solve the problem into the steps that I said, which falls under the new knowledge of this research. In step 1, we construct a causal loop diagram to represent the structural relationship among the variables that govern the system behavior. Now that I have introduced the test problem, this method has 4 steps basically. First, I represent the structural relationships in the system using a causal loop. Second, I interpret this structure, as I said before, through a system archetype. Third, I translate the system structural tension into a compromise decision support formulation. Finally, I evaluate the resulting policies numerically over time. In the next few slides, you will see I follow these same 4 steps using the photovoltaic battery microgrid problem as I just introduced. In the first step of solving the test problem, I represent the microgrid structurally using a causal loop diagram. You saw the causal loop diagram in slide 4. And now we have our own causal loop diagram. And this causal loop diagram is the causal loop diagram that I formed when I took the problem statement into mind. Now, these are the various variables that depend on each other in a positive or a negative way. And these diagram helps me identify the major variables and the feedback relationships that drive the system behavior over time. On the right side, I captured the short-term relief loop. So as I said, the operator discharges the battery. When the battery discharge increases, delivered energy increases and the service shortfall decreases. Now this is the balancing loop. On the left side, you see that I captured the longer-term erosion loop. Now, repeated battery discharge increases the battery degradation, which reduces the battery state of health and the usable capacity of the battery. As the usable capacity decreases, future service shortfalls increase. And that creates a pressure in to discharge the battery again. Now, this is the reinforcing loop. So you see there's a balancing loop and the reinforcing loop. More discharge, more delivered energy, lower service shortfall. More battery discharge, more degradation, lower battery health and capacity, higher future shortfall. So in this step, I take the descriptive energy problem that we have, and I take the variables from there. I take the relationships they had with each other, and I just plot it in a causal loop diagram and to show it. Now, as I get the causal loop, I have to interpret it into an existing pattern or archetype that we already have. So I interpret it with Peter Senge's fifth discipline, the one he described as fixes that fail. And in this problem, the corrective, so fixes that fail has a corrective action and the delayed effect. Now, this corrective action is the battery discharge. As I said, when the operator says that it needs more battery discharge, it will deliver more energy and lower service shortfall. So that is our corrective discharge. In short term, this is the battery discharge, increases the delivered energy and reduces service shortfall. That is the balancing loop of our fixes that fail. And now, over time, the same corrective action, so we are discharging it, right? So the same corrective action creates a delayed side effect. And this happens later in time. Now, repeated battery discharge increases the battery degradation, reduces battery health and usable capacity, and increases the risk of future shortfalls. Now, this is the reinforcing erosion loop. So the main structural tension in the problem is between a meeting current service needs and preserving future battery capability. This tension becomes a basis for the quantitative decision formulation in the next step. So I'll just revise this. We get the causal loop diagram. We interpret it as fixes that fail. Now, what to do with this? In step 4, I need to translate this archetype or the pattern of fixes that fail into a compromise decision support problem. In this step, I move this into a decision formulation, basically. Once I identify the structural tension in fixes that fail pattern, I need a way to represent the tension quantitatively, which is the main focus. In this problem, the operator must allocate energy every day across the 3 stakeholder groups: critical, household, productive, right? And the tension is very clear. If the operator discharges the battery more aggressively, the present service shortfalls decreases. But repeated discharge degrades the battery and reduces the future system capability. I therefore use a compromise decision support problem or a CDSP to represent this trade-off explicitly, mathematically. In this formulation, the short-term objective is to reduce the service shortfall, as I say, and the long-term objective is to preserve. Our main focus is that we should preserve the battery capability, but also we should make sure that these 3 stakeholders, which are the critical, the household, and the productive, should get same or equal amount of energy, because that should not hinder. Once I define it, I organize it into a compromise decision support problem structure, which is the given, find, satisfy, and minimize. And so what is given? So I know each day, such as the photovoltaic energy, how many days are there? 30 days. And so I write that under find. And how much energy to discharge from the battery. I also include the deviation variables, which measure how far the delivered energy falls below or exceeds the target surface, target service levels. Under satisfy, we know that what are our constraints and the physical constraints, such as the energy balance, the demand bounds, the battery feasibility, and also non-negativity. And finally, under minimize, I take the weighted deviation function and the summation of all the weighted deviation function, and I minimize them so that the model finds a satisfying compromise rather than to satisfy every goal perfectly. It cannot do that. So we go to the next slide that says that we present the mathematical form of the model. We do not expect the audience to read every equation. Instead, I will use this slide to explain what the formulation represents. The objective function minimizes the weighted deviated function, which I said, and of the stakeholder service targets. The goal equations are define how delivered energy compares with the desired service shortfall for each stakeholder group. And the constraint, there are different constraints, which are like the physical feasibility and the physical limits of the microgrid, including the energy balance, the demand bounds, and the feasible battery operation. Through this formulation, we represent the archetype explicitly. Now you may ask me, like, what happened to the causal loop to this? So you remember the corrective action in the causal loop, it becomes a decision variables. The service shortfalls, it becomes a deviation variables. the physical system limits, it becomes a constraints. So basically the archetype that we got in the causal loop, and we got what archetype it is, I just interpret it in the form of the compromise decision support problem and just say this part of the archetype becomes this in the compromise decision support problem. Now step 4 is the result. So it was a 4-step procedure, and now we went to step 4, which is the numerical evaluation and the closed loop policy analysis. Now, as I move to step 4 of the proposed method, which is a numerical evaluation, up to this point, I have framed the problem structurally, interpreted it through fixes that fail archetype, and translated into CDSP patterns or formulation. In this step, I actually solve the model and evaluate how different policy choices behave over time. I take 2 policy choices here, and over a period of 30 days, and after each daily decision, I update the battery state variables externally, which is the state of capacity of the battery and the state of the health of the battery. And after doing that, so basically we have 2 models. One is the baseline and one is the context aware. So baseline in the causal loop diagram, we saw that there's a short-term fix. Our baseline represents the short-term fix. But we need something that will prevent the long-term erosion, right? So the context aware is the long-term like preventing of the long-term erosion. And I do it under 7 weight scenarios, and the weights equal to the summation of all the weights equal to 1. And I solve it sequentially over the period of 30 days, as I said. And I update the battery state in Excel after every run. And then I again put it in compromise decision support problem and do it. So the previous battery state becomes the input of my next battery state. And I measure the total shortfall, the shortfall variance, the final battery state of health, and the average daily shortfalls for critical household productive. Now we have to see that the electricity that they were getting before that, or the energy they were getting, it should not get hindered, right? So that will kind of make the stakeholders angry. So we don't want that. So we want to keep that in mind, but also we don't want to, we want to keep the battery in a good state, and the state of health of the battery should be preserved. So as I said, here are 2 baseline policy and context-aware policy. In this slide, I say about them, the baseline policy represents a system that follows only the physical feasibility limits of the microgrid. It allows the battery discharge as long as the discharge remains physically feasible. It does not include any mechanism that protects the battery against overuse. So under this policy, we use the battery aggressively whenever additional discharge reduces immediate service shortfalls. In this sense, the baseline policy represents the short-term corrective action in the fixes that fail archetype. To make it understand better, I will just show the fixes that fail again so that we can understand this. So we have this short-term fix and we have a long-term unintended consequence, right? So this baseline policy doesn't have any mechanism to protect the battery, and it's the short-term fix. It's just discharging it as long as it can feasibly discharge it. And but in the context-aware policy, we add a discharge limit, a constraint. And this is a corrective action under fixes that fail that will kind of preserve the battery health for a longer time. And it restricts the aggressive use of battery. So, okay. So we solved that. So first, let's talk about the baseline policy. There are 2 slides of baseline policy and 2 slides of corrective action or the context-aware policy. In this slide, we present the results under baseline policy across the 7 stakeholder weights scenarios. You can see that all the weights are here. Okay. So they're there, and all the summation of the weights should be equal to 1. And we observe that the final state of health of the battery is remain constant. It's becoming 0.951 in all 7 cases. Since the stakeholder weights change across scenarios while the battery outcome remains constant, we infer that the battery the battery outcome remains constant and the weights change who absorb the shortfall, but they do not significantly affect the total battery degradation under the unconstrained policy. In other words, under the baseline policy, we respond strongly to the stakeholder priorities, but we do not protect the battery, as I said. So when we prioritize the critical services, the household or the productive users, the shortfalls shift accordingly to them, okay? And so the weights influence allocation in the intended use. So we have used weights, right, to allocate different weightage on different stakeholders. And however, also observe that the battery reaches the same degraded condition in all 7 scenarios that we have here. Now let's understand this in a ternary space. And also I have marked the satisficing region. I'll tell you about the satisficing region. In this slide, we visualize the baseline policy outcomes in a ternary space where each point, as you see, represent one admissible combination of the 3 stakeholder weights from the previous table. The vertices represent the full priority of one stakeholder, and the edges represents the pairwise compromise, and the interior represents more balanced priorities. The most important feature here is that the shaded or the outlined band, which represents the satisficing region. By that, I mean that the set of weight combinations for each, which a given stakeholder goal remains adequately protected. So this plot does not show the direction of priority, just did not show the direction of priority. It also shows that where the policy achieves an acceptable level of protection for each stakeholder. So we need something more acceptable. And for example, when I move towards a critical services vertex, I enter the satisficing region for the critical demand more strongly. When I move towards the household vertex, so we have the 3 vertex, right? And we move towards the household vertex, the household goal is better protected. So you see the different vertex, but these are for different weight scenarios, and the 3 goals are there. And so methodically, this is important because we use a ternary plot not only to visualize a priority structure, like what is the weight priority for each goal at a given, for a given scenario, and but also to visualize the acceptable compromise region under the baseline policy. So you see the compromise region where it is more satisfied. At the same time, this slide still reflects only on the allocation side of the method. It does not tell us that the system is preserving it. So it's baseline. So it will not preserve anything. It's just giving away. So, and it's a short-term fix. So as it gives away, so it's showing us that it's depleting. Now we come towards the policy, which is the context-aware policy. So what's a context-aware policy? So it's something that has a constraint, and due to this constraint, it's restricting the usage, right? But it also makes sure that the same amount is being delivered. So in this slide, I focus mainly on the state of health. So you see there is a change. In the previous slide, you saw that it was 0.951, but in this slide, it reaches 1 in 5 instances of it. We observed that the 5 out of the 7 scenarios, especially S1, S1, S4, S5, S6, X7, the final battery state of health reaches 1. Only in S2 and S3, we see that it remains at 0.951. So the first thing I want to point out is that the context-aware policy improves it. It improves the state of health, improves battery preservation in most of the evaluated cases. Now the value of so it reaches 0.986. So the average of state of health in the previous chart was 0.951 because all the values were 0.951. But in this one, if you say that the average is 0.986, but it is giving the same amount of discharge to critical, household, and productive. So this method matters methodically because I do not change the stakeholder weights. So you will see that the same stakeholder weights across the 7 scenarios is taken for this case also. And I only change one thing, and I add a battery discharge constraint when solving the compromise decision support, as I said. And so when I observe this improvement in state of health, I interpret it as an effect of regulating the corrective action more carefully over time. At the same time, I also want to point out the trade-off. If we look at the total shortfall, which is this one, short, we see that in some scenarios, the total shortfall becomes slightly larger than the previous baseline case. So the context-aware does not remove the tension. Instead, it changes how we manage that tension by satisfying some shortfall, short-term relief in order to preserve a long-term battery capability. Now we come to the same, like the ternary. So this is the same ternary geometry as baseline, but it's for the plot. This is plotted for the table before, and it has the same stakeholder priority logic. The shaded or outlined band represents satisficing region. main change appears in battery preserving behavior, not the priority ranking. So we see that the same amount, so the plots remain, so we are plotting the plots based on the energy or the electricity that the three stakeholders are getting. So the plots remains same because the same amount of energy or electricity, like they're similar, so they get the same amount of energy or electricity. But the state of health in the previous chart differs. It changes in this better version of the policy. Sorry. Okay. So there is a direct comparison here. I present the direct comparison across all the 7 scenarios that the stakeholder priority structure remains unchanged while the battery outcome changes substantially. Under the baseline policy, it was 0.951. Under the context-aware policy, the final state of health is 1. In 5 of the 7 cases, from this comparison, we infer that the main difference between the two policies lies not on in who receives the priority, but in how intensively we use the battery to achieve that priority. So from the method perspective, this comparison is central to our interpretation. Through this archetype, we identify a structural tension between a short-term relief and a long-term erosion. Now, this might change from archetype to archetype. So here only one archetype is shown, which is fixes that fail. But if we convert another archetype or represent another archetype, which is like success to the successful or something else, then it would change. And for this one, it was just a constraint. And through the CDSP formulation, we represent that the tension quantitatively. When we compare the two policies directly, we observe that the added context-aware constraint that I said, so we had a constraint on the battery, changes the intensity of the corrective action more than it changes the underlying allocation logic. So allocation should not change. From the system's perspective, we therefore interpret that the context-aware policy not simply as an alternate allocation policy, but as a control policy. So we can say that it's a control, right? We put a control on it, and that better preserves the long-term system capability. So basically here I just write the numerical results as as a systems interpretation. Under the baseline policy, you see that there are more battery discharge, lower immediate shortfall, faster degradation, less future capability, state of health decreases. And in context-aware policy, you see that the battery discharge is constrained. So slightly larger short-term deficits in some cases, slower degradation, better long-term capability, better state of health of the battery. So again, I just take the same diagram of the fixes that fail, and I just say that, okay, you saw that the fixes that fail in Peter Senge's book, and now the same fixes that fail for our problem, and I just summarize it. So numerical results are not separate from the archetype. These are exactly what the archetype predicts. The baseline policy, as you see the upper, this one, the baseline policy, strengthens the short-term fix, and this lower box is the long-term, the context-aware policy, which is basically the delayed erosion. So baseline is the strongest short-term fix, context-aware is a weaker long-term erosion, and results align with the fixes that fail archetype. In this slide, I want to briefly share where I see the research going next. So as you know, this is my second year as a PhD, and this is my first paper. In terms of future work, I want to extend this beyond a single archetype, as I said. So I just did it for one archetype. So I am looking for more use cases to validate and use this method. I'm looking for collaboration. And in the work I presented today, it's just I focus on fixes that fail as a proof of concept. But in broader research, I want to show how different feedback structures as limits to growth or tragedy of commons, success to the successful. These are patterns, right? These are archetypes, and these are qualitative, but we need something which is quantitative and will lead to different control logic. So here the control logic, as I put a constraint. So this was for fixes that fail. But what if there are different patterns, different archetypes? So control logics will change simultaneously. This is important because socio-technical systems rarely contain one pattern. So here we are referring to one pattern. It might contain a different combination of patterns. Second, I want to situate this work under more broader context of context-aware cognitive control, which is basically a layered architecture. And I want to situate this work in a layered architecture form where there is a structural interpretation layer, decision formulation layer, operational control layer. So within one adaptive framework. And third, upcoming plans to integrate AI, use LLMs to extract the feedback variables and the causal relations from different stakeholder narratives. As you saw that in this problem, there were only 3 simple stakeholders, but there might be different perspective of stakeholders, and there might be different variables and different relations between these variables. And I want AI to assist in identifying candidate system archetypes from qualitative descriptions. So there might be description, which is qualitative, which is in words, and AI can help us to identify this system archetypes from there and compare multiple possible loop interpretation before human validation. So from listening to that description, it creates this possible loop interpretations that might represent one archetype or represent a series or bunch or a combination of archetypes. And thank you everyone for listening to me. I'm looking for more use cases to validate. And I'm also it's a call for collaboration. If you want to collaborate, my email address is given here, suramyaa.sarkar -1 @ou.edu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Suramyaa, for your insightful talk. That was indeed interesting, and I'm looking forward to talk to you more regarding your research. For now, we'll open the floor for questions. You can raise your hand or you can type your questions in the chat, and I'll take them from there.
Yeah, I want to add value to what Suramyaa has said. Okay, this is a very, very powerful idea. For example, when we look at a problem, we think in terms of words. I would like to maximize this, minimize that, or I want to avoid something happening. I want to encourage something to happen. What Suramyaa has shown here is, hey, guess what? Peter Senge has come up with these constructs based on control theory. And what he has done, he's come along and given captions to these constructs. For example, fixes that fail. Right? Now, what Suramyaa has shown here is that, hey, look, these words have a picture. Now, given that there is a picture, how to come up with the mathematics for it? So when we think in terms of dealing with systems level problems that go beyond just technology, using these words and phrases could help frame the problem. And this is where I see LLMs being very helpful. Using text analysis to frame the problems. You'd give a statement coming along and saying, hey, here is the technical problem, here's the social side of it, here's this side of it. Now, frame the problem according to these words and phrases. These words and phrases were tied to the archetypes that Senge has come up with, and we'll have more of them. And we'll come along and say, here's the formulation of the problem. So it's extremely powerful and has great value in what people are doing. For example, there's an element of predictive analytics in that, very important. There's an element of in energy management. You have to manage the energy. How do you do it? If somebody comes along and says, do this, that, and the other thing in policy, but it doesn't work, you're stuck. So this gives us linguistic flexibility to be able to address such problems. So it's a very, very powerful idea. And Suramyaa today has put it forward for the first time in our lab. So with that as background, I invite people to say, all right, I can see how I may be able to use it in my work, or this is what it is, because we are looking for problems that are already being solved where we can relate these different archetypes to. Go ahead.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Yeah, hi. So it is an interesting topic, as Farooq has told, that this is the first time I'm hearing something about archetypes. That term itself is new, and if that can be related to satisfying. I have a couple of observations. It's basically more of a suggestion about what others may also ask, like when you go to exams and such things on this topic. If you can go to slide 5.
Mm-hmm. Give me a minute. Just a minute. Yeah, slide 5. Yes.
Yeah, so in slide 5, you say you have mentioned something called fully satisfied. Not everything can be fully satisfied, and one clarity here is needed because one
Mm-hmm.
may think that as soon as you use satisfying word, it is not optimization. But
Yeah.
here you are using a very interesting term. It cannot be fully satisfied. So a question comes out, um, is fully satisfied not satisfying, but optimizing?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a new thing here, the degree of satisfying, right?
Mm-hmm.
which is somewhat, interesting. Like less satisfying and more satisfying, or fully satisfying, or no satisfying. So are you introducing this new concept of within satisfying? Or is it that simply when you say fully satisfying, it means fully satisfying is equivalent to optimizing?
So here I mean that not all goals can be fully satisfied at the same time. So we have three goals here. So we have the productive, the critical, and the household, and we have to give energy or electricity to all three of them. And so how can we fully satisfy all the goals at the same time, keeping in mind that the constraints that we have, the bounds that we have, and that cannot be done if we are looking for like systems which
No,
is
no, but it's satisfying not by definition, not optimizing. So what is fully
see,
satisfying?
so I
Okay,
did
let
not
me
say
let
fully
me answer
satisfied.
that. Let me answer that question. Prakash, you raised a very important point. I want to use the example of pregnancy. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You can't be approximately pregnant. So Suramya has used this qualifier fully when it's not necessary. Okay? It's not necessary. And people tend to use these qualifiers, and I tend to push back. What is more satisfying? Nothing. Means nothing. So we have to be very careful about the qualifiers that we use because it's either one or the other. It can't be both.
Yeah, that was my point. Like if it is
Okay.
satisfying, then it is satisfying. Or if it is
That's right.
optimized, means absolute optimized, which we don't
Yeah.
like, right? So,
So it
so what is fully satisfying? I was curious.
doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah. Okay. So now I come to the second question. Unless others have other questions, then I will let others and I will come in the second round. I think that is better.
Go ahead. Zareen, back to you.
I guess you can continue, and then I'll have one question. And
Okay. I will quickly finish because I have to leave also. So my question is a little bit more technical. Again, with an exam point of view, like somebody may comment on that, like in this particular case study. You talk about the power, the batteries, right? So generally, people nowadays, use the lithium ion batteries. So people will say that, it's better for battery health if you discharge and charge. It is like exercise for the battery, right? So, but I understand that you are not talking about lithium ion battery. So immediate reaction, somebody will say that, what are you talking about? Like you should not keep it fully charged. But you are talking about lead acid battery because you are talking about power grid, right?
Yes, yes.
So Now, if you look at the lead acid battery, there is this concept of float voltage. So the modern UPS system, like the uninterrupted power supply systems, which you are aware that in India every household uses this UPS systems, right? So they have this technology called float voltage, which takes care of keeping a float voltage so that the battery doesn't get damaged if it gets discharged when the power cut is there. And then again, when power comes, it charges it. So somebody may ask this question that how is your research relevant when the battery health is taken care by the float voltage concept? So you should study that a little bit and be ready with an answer. So that's what was my comment. Yeah, thank you. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sarah got a question. Please go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Suramyaa. It was nice presentation. You did a really great job. Just if I understand correctly, I think the current work that you are doing is kind of day-to-day data that you are using for 30 days. And based on understanding that you consider some decision for each day and update the battery for the other days. That is the things that I noticed. So based on that, I think in your method, if you are considering it, that is for future work. When you mentioned the future work, I was wondering, are you talking about this or not? But I think at this moment, based on the method that you have, yes, it's really beneficial that you are able to update the model for the day after or something like that. But have you ever thought about the predictive analytics, about the future of the system? Before you are going through the CDSP, you do the predictive analytics in this way to help to estimate that future demand, solar generation, battery degradation, and future shortfall, In this way, I think that could make the context-aware policy, when you said context-aware policy, more adaptive and better aligned with the long-term consequences. So that is the things that I considered. It came to my mind. I was wondering that to hear it, am I able to hear it in your future work? I am not sure. Do you plan to consider this in your work, or you think it's not something that you want to work on it?
That's a very important, that's a very good thought, Sarah, because when we talk about systems, a cyber physical social system, they're constantly evolving over time, and there is a lot of uncertainty which is there. And I did not predict future states as of now. But here I just took some data and I feel from day to day and I update it externally. But this is like I will consider it and also put it in my future work. First I will consider it because I feel like when we look at any problem, data will constantly change over time, and that's a very good observation. Thank you, Sarah. I will note it down. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Because as you heard about my work, I predict the data for future, but the only uncertainty that I considered, it was uncertainty on the data. But you are right, there is lots of uncertainty, like we have unseen data, we have like policy changing and all this aspect. And I plan to also consider those different uncertainty before starting the predictive analytics.
Yes.
Before starting the predictive analytics. That is also important aspect that I think it would be helpful for you as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. If anyone does not have any more question, I will ask one.
Mhm.
So I know that probably you are using different algorithm, but I just wanted to ask, like, do you see your framework integrating with learning-based control methods, like probably reinforcement learning, where the policy is learning like dynamically instead of solving a fixed decision problem?
Yes. So the main idea of this research is that there are these problems, and these fall under certain patterns of problems. And these patterns, so when we go to reinforcement learning or any sort of learning based, or you can see knowledge graphs. So these things are like basically they work on something that has been solved before, some like that has been encountered before. And if we know the mechanism inside to solve a known pattern that is going on, a known pattern with uncertainty that is going on for the past years, then we can solve the problem in a better way. So when learning comes, you can say it's a sort of a cognitive learning where you see something, your brain says, okay, this falls under this pattern, and I have encountered seen this last year, or this has happened before. And then your brain knows how to tackle that or how to solve that problem. So the main focus here is that how can I put these problems into a certain pattern of problems? And yes, so learning is very important here. I haven't taken that into consideration as of now, but I would say that the in future learning is very important here. And yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I was asking because I have kind of similar goal in mind. In my case, also we have to consider degradation and some other things. These which I can't like fix in short term. I have to think with long term cases, and in that case, my idea is like to predict dynamically, and uh, in that case, like to change the weights dynamically, not just giving some fixed weights to the constraints or the problems. So, yeah, that's what I was asking. And I'll talk to you more because that seems very interesting and that seems very related to what I'm trying to achieve.
Thank you, sir. Definitely looking forward to talk to you.
Sure. Does anyone have any more questions?
No, I think.
Let's see. Ahmad, you want to share something?
Sorry, I was just texting Farooq. Yes, really nice presentation, Suramyaa. I think, especially in terms of long-term stability of the system, it sort of ties to my work as well, because I develop system-level model as well. So thank you so much for the talk.
So I'm going to stop recording and we can go into the chit chat mode. And that should, yeah. So now we can talk about